The corridor was silent, except for the echo of boots on marble. Captain Edward Harlow had walked these halls for 12 years, every corner memorized, every shadow familiar. But tonight, something felt wrong. He paused near the east wing, hand resting on his sidearm. A faint light glowed beneath a door that should have been dark. The old library. No one used it anymore. Not at this hour. Not ever, really. Edward's pulse quickened. Security protocols were absolute. Every room, every movement, logged and cleared. This was not cleared. He approached slowly, each step measured. His training screamed caution, but his instinct screamed louder. Someone was inside. And they didn't want to be found. Before we continue, if you love true stories that reveal hidden moments and raw human emotion, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Edward's hand touched the cold brass handle. He could hear voices now. Muffled, urgent. One voice he recognized instantly. It sent ice through his veins. The Queen Consort, Camilla. But who was she talking to? And why here, in secret, in the dead of night? He turned the handle. The door opened without a sound. The hinges had been oiled recently. Someone had planned this. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single lamp. Shadows stretched long across dusty bookshelves. And there, near the far window, stood Camilla. She was dressed simply. No royal jewelry, no formal attire. Just a dark coat and a scarf pulled tight. Across from her stood a man. Younger, broad-shouldered. His face was tense. His hands clenched at his sides. Edward's breath caught. He knew that face. He'd seen it in briefings, in files marked confidential. Thomas Bowles. Camilla's son from a previous relationship. A man the palace had kept hidden from the public for decades. "You can't keep doing this," Thomas said, his voice strained. "It's eating you alive." Camilla shook her head. "You don't understand. If this comes out, everything falls apart. Everything we've built, everything your siblings have. My siblings don't even know I exist." Thomas's voice rose, sharp and bitter. "How is that fair? How is any of this fair?" Edward stood frozen in the doorway. He should announce himself. He should follow protocol. But something held him back. This was not a security threat. This was something far more dangerous. This was truth. Camilla's shoulders sagged. For a moment, she looked small, fragile. Nothing like the woman the world saw on balconies and in grand halls. "I made choices," she whispered. "Choices I can't undo. I gave you up so you could have a normal life. So you wouldn't be trapped in this. This cage you gave me up to protect your image," Thomas shot back. "Let's not pretend it was noble." The words hung in the air like smoke. Camilla flinched as if she'd been struck. Edward's mind raced. He'd heard rumors over the years. Whispers among older staff. A son, a secret. But rumors were just rumors. Until now. "I need you to understand," Camilla said, her voice breaking. When Charles and I when we were finally able to be together, there were conditions, sacrifices. You were already grown. You had a life. Bringing you into this world would have destroyed you. You don't get to decide that," Thomas said quietly. "You don't get to choose my pain for me." A silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. And then Camilla looked up. Her eyes met Edward's across the room. She didn't gasp, didn't move, just stared at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Fear. Not the fear of danger. The fear of exposure. The fear of losing everything. Asterisk. "Captain Harlow," Camilla said softly. Her voice was steady now, controlled. The mask slipping back into place. "I assume you have questions." Edward stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His duty was clear. Report the breach. Log the incident. But his conscience was louder. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. "This room was not on tonight's clearance list. I'm aware." She glanced at Thomas, then back to Edward. "This is a private matter. One that requires discretion." Edward's jaw tightened. A discretion, the word the palace used when truth became inconvenient. Thomas stepped forward, his posture defensive. "You going to arrest us?" drag us out in handcuffs? Thomas, Camilla warned. No, I want to know, Thomas continued, his eyes locked on Edward. What happens now? You report this to your superiors? They bury it deeper? Threaten me into silence again? Again, the word echoed in Edward's mind. This wasn't the first time. Thomas had been here before, had tried before, and been silenced. I'm not here to threaten anyone, Edward said evenly, but I need to understand what's happening. If there's a security risk, there's no risk, Camilla interrupted. Thomas's family. He's my son. The admission, spoken aloud, felt seismic. As if the walls themselves might crack from the weight of it, Edward studied Thomas. The resemblance was there, if you looked closely. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. But more than that, there was pain. Deep and old and unhealed. How long has this been going on? Edward asked. Years, Thomas said bitterly. Secret meetings. Coded messages. All so the world doesn't find out the queen consort abandoned her own child. I didn't abandon you, Camilla said, her voice rising. I placed you with a good family. You had everything you needed except a mother. The words struck like a blade. Camilla turned away, her hand pressed to her mouth. Edward felt the urge to leave, to pretend he'd never walked through that door. But he couldn't, not anymore. Why now? He asked quietly. Why tonight? Thomas's expression darkened. Because tomorrow, someone's planning to leak the story. A journalist. Someone who's been digging for months. They have photos, documents, proof. Edward's blood ran cold. A leak like this would ignite a firestorm. The press would devour it. The public would demand answers. And the palace. The palace would do what it always did. Deny, deflect, destroy. Does the king know? Edward asked. Camilla shook her head. Charles knows Thomas exists. He's always known. But he doesn't know about tonight. He doesn't know it's about to go public. You have to tell him, Edward said. I can't. Her voice cracked. He's already under so much pressure. The coronation, the scrutiny, the comparisons to his mother. If this comes out now, it will overshadow everything. It will become the story. Not his reign, not his vision, just ... scandal. Edward understood the calculus. The palace always thought in terms of image, legacy, control. But he also understood something else. This was a woman standing between two impossible choices. Protect her family or protect the crown. I came here to beg him, Camilla said, looking at Thomas. To beg him not to speak to the journalist. To let me handle it quietly. I told her no, Thomas said firmly. I'm done hiding. I'm done being the secret that's too shameful to acknowledge. It's not about shame, Camilla pleaded. It's about timing. About strategy. It's about control, Thomas countered. You want to control the narrative. Control me, just like you've always done. Edward watched the exchange, his mind racing. He'd spent his entire career protecting the royal family, following orders, maintaining the illusion of perfection. But what was he protecting now? A crown? Or a mother trying to hold on to the last thread connecting her to her son? What do you want? Edward asked Thomas directly. What would make this right? Thomas laughed, a hollow sound. There is no making this right. But I want acknowledgement. I want the world to know I exist, that I'm not a mistake, that I'm not something to be hidden away in the dark. Camilla closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. If you do this, they will tear you apart. The press, the public, everyone. They won't see you as a person. They'll see you as a scandal, and let them, Thomas said. At least I'll be seen. The room fell silent. Edward felt the weight of the moment pressing down. He was a witness now. A part of this, and whatever choice he made next would ripple far beyond this room. Your Majesty, Edward said slowly, if this is going public tomorrow, you have hours. Not days, hours to get ahead of it. Camilla stared at Edward as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a guard, not as palace staff, But as a man with a choice, what are you suggesting? She asked carefully. Edward hesitated. What he was about to say could end his career. But staying silent felt worse. Can't stop the truth, he said, but you can own it. You can tell the story yourself. Before someone else does. Thomas's eyes narrowed. And why would she do that? Why would the palace ever admit the truth? Because lies are expensive, Edward said. They cost trust. And right now, trust is the only currency that matters. Camilla sank into a chair, her face pale. You don't understand what you're asking. The protocols, the advisors, the palace communications team, they would never allow it. Then don't ask them, Edward said. Tell the king, let him decide. Camilla shook her head. Charles will want to protect the institution. He always does. He'll bury this. And in the process, he'll bury Thomas too. Thomas flinched at the words. Edward could see the history there. Years of being erased. Years of being the secret no one spoke about. Your Majesty, Edward said gently. With respect, you don't know what the king will do. Not until you tell him. I know my husband, Camilla replied. I know what he values. Duty, legacy, order. Then appeal to that, Edward pressed. Tell him the truth serves those things better than a cover-up. Tell him the public is tired of secrets, that they want authenticity. Thomas let out a bitter laugh. Authenticity from the monarchy? That's rich. But Camilla was listening now. Edward could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. If I tell Charles, she said slowly, and he agrees to acknowledge Thomas publicly, it changes everything. The narrative, the timing, the control. We could release a statement before the journalist does. Frame it as a moment of honesty, or Thomas interjected. He shuts it down, and I go to the press anyway. And then it looks even worse. Camilla looked at her son. Really looked at him. Is that what you want? To burn it all down? I want to be free, Thomas said quietly. I want to stop living in the margins of your life. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something in the room. Even Edward felt it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. About being seen. Camilla stood, squaring her shoulders. All right, I'll tell him. Tonight. Thomas blinked, surprised. You will? I don't know what he'll say, Camilla admitted. But I can't keep living like this either. You're right. I've been controlling this out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, but maybe it's time to stop being afraid. Edward felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would end differently. Maybe the truth could actually win. I'll escort you to the king's chambers, Edward offered. Camilla nodded. Thank you, Captain. But as they moved toward the door, Thomas didn't follow. Not going, he said. Camilla turned. What? I've spent my whole life waiting for you to choose me, Thomas said, his voice steady. I'm not going to sit in some hallway waiting again. You talk to him. You decide what kind of mother you want to be. But I'm done begging for scraps. Camilla's face crumpled. Thomas, please no, he said firmly. You have until morning. If I don't hear from you by then, I'm talking to the journalist, and I'm telling my story. All of it. The ultimatum hung in the air. Final, non-negotiable. Camilla looked at Edward, desperation in her eyes. Can you? Can you stay with him? Make sure he's safe? Edward understood what she was really asking. Make sure he doesn't leave. Make sure he doesn't talk. But he also understood what Thomas needed. Space. Respect. Agency. I'll stay, Edward said. But I won't stop him if he chooses to leave. Camilla's lips trembled. She looked at Thomas one last time, as if memorizing his face. I love you, she whispered. I know you don't believe me, but I do. Thomas said nothing, just watched as his mother walked out of the room, her footsteps fading into the silence. When she was gone, Thomas exhaled sharply and sank into a chair. You think she'd actually tell him? He asked. Edward leaned against the doorframe. I think she wants to. That's not the same thing. No, Edward agreed. It's not. They sat in silence for a long moment. The old library felt heavier now, filled with the weight of secrets and choices. "Why are you helping us?" Thomas asked suddenly. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Edward considered the question. Why was he helping? It would be easier to walk away, to report the incident and let the palace machine handle it. But he'd seen too much, heard too much. "'Cause I've spent 12 years protecting a family," Edward said. "And tonight, I realized I don't actually know what that means anymore." Thomas studied him. "You think the truth is worth protecting?" "I think people are," Edward replied. "And right now, you're a person caught in a system that doesn't see you. That's worth protecting." Thomas's expression softened. "Just slightly." "You might lose your job for this," Edward said. "I might." But as he stood there in that quiet room, watching over a man the world didn't know existed, Edward felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. An hour passed, then another. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, seconds stretching longer than the last. Thomas paced the library, his footsteps restless. Edward remained by the door, silent, watchful, waiting. What if he says no? Thomas finally asked, breaking the silence. Edward didn't answer immediately. He'd been asking himself the same question. "Then you do what you need to do," Edward said. Thomas stopped pacing. "You really believe that? You'd let me walk out of here and destroy everything?" "I don't think you want to destroy anything," Edward said. "I think you want to exist. There's a difference." Thomas's shoulders sagged. He sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. "I used to imagine it, he said quietly. "Being part of the family. Standing on the balcony. Being in the photos. Stupid, right?" "No," Edward said. "It's human." "I had a good childhood," Thomas continued. "My adoptive parents were kind. They loved me. But there was always this ... hole. This question. Why wasn't I enough? Why did she give me away?" Edward moved closer, pulling up a chair across from Thomas. "I don't think it was about you not being enough," Edward said carefully. "I think it was about her being afraid." Thomas looked up, his eyes red. "Afraid of what?" "Of not being enough herself," Edward replied. "Of failing you. Of failing everyone." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You talk like you know her. I've watched her for years," Edward said. "I've seen the mask she wears. But I've also seen the moments when it slips. Tonight was one of those moments." "She cried," Thomas said, almost to himself. "I've never seen her cry before." "Maybe that's a start," Edward offered. Before Thomas could respond, the door opened. Camilla stepped inside, and Edward's stomach dropped. She was alone. No King Charles. No advisors. No resolution. Just her, looking exhausted and defeated. "He's not coming, is he?" Thomas said flatly. Camilla closed the door softly. "He wants to meet you tomorrow. Privately." Thomas stood abruptly. "Tomorrow? The story breaks tomorrow. There is no tomorrow." "I convinced him to delay the statement," Camilla said quickly. "I told him we needed time. That rushing it would make it worse." "You're stalling," Thomas accused. "I'm buying time," Camilla corrected. "Time for him to process this. Time for us to do this right. There is no right way to do this." Thomas's voice rose. "There's only truth or lies. And you're choosing lies again." "I'm choosing strategy," Camilla shot back. "If we release a statement tonight, it looks panicked. Defensive. If we wait until after you meet Charles, it looks intentional. Thoughtful." She had a point. But so did Thomas. "What did the king say?" Edward asked. "When you told him." Camilla's face tightened. "He was ... surprised. Not that Thomas existed, but that it was coming out. He asked me why I didn't warn him sooner." "And what did you say?" Thomas asked. "I told him the truth," Camilla said. "That I was scared. That I didn't know how to fix it. That I'd been trying to protect everyone and ended up protecting no one." The admission hung in the air, raw, honest. "Did he believe you?" Thomas asked quietly. Camilla's eyes glistened. "I don't know. But he listened. And he agreed to meet you." That's more than I expected. Thomas turned away, his hands clenched. And the journalist? The leak? I have someone reaching out, Camilla said, asking for a delay, offering an exclusive interview in exchange. Thomas spun around. You're negotiating with them? I'm trying to control the damage, Camilla said. If the story breaks before you and Charles meet, it poisons everything. The public will see Charles as being forced into acknowledging you. But if we meet first, if we release a joint statement, it becomes a story of reconciliation. Edward could see the logic, but he could also see Thomas's face, the anger, the frustration. The years of being a pawn in someone else's game, you're still manipulating this, Thomas said bitterly. Still making it about optics. I'm making it survivable, Camilla replied. For all of us. Thomas shook his head. I don't care about surviving. I care about living. Then live, Camilla said, her voice breaking. Meet your stepfather. Let him see you as a person, not a scandal. Give him a chance to do the right thing. And if he doesn't? Camilla's face hardened. Then I'll stand with you, publicly, whatever the cost. The promise landed like a stone. Edward saw Thomas's expression shift. Surprise, hope, fear. You'd do that? Thomas asked. You'd defy him? You're my son, Camilla said simply. I failed you once. I won't do it again. Thomas stared at her, searching her face for lies. But all Edward saw was a mother, stripped of titles and crowns, offering the only thing she had left, her word. One meeting, Thomas said finally. One chance. But if he dismisses me, if he treats me like a problem to solve, I'm done. I go to the press. I tell everything. Camilla nodded. Understood. Edward stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may, tomorrow's meeting needs to be handled carefully. Location, timing, security. If word gets out before the official statement, the press will swarm. Camilla turned to him, gratitude in her eyes. You'll help arrange it? Edward hesitated. He was crossing lines now, big ones. But there was no going back. It will, he said. But we need to move quickly. And we need to be honest. With each other, with the king, with Thomas. Camilla straightened, the queen consort mask sliding back into place. But softer this time. More human. Thank you, Captain Harlow, she said. For your service and your discretion. Edward nodded. But as he looked at Thomas, still standing, with arms crossed, still wary, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, Edward wondered if discretion was the right word. Maybe what they needed wasn't discretion. Maybe what they needed was courage. The morning arrived cold and gray. Edward had barely slept. He'd spent the night coordinating with palace security, arranging a private room, ensuring no staff would be present except those who absolutely needed to know. The fewer people involved, the better. Thomas had stayed in a guest suite under a false name. Edward had personally escorted him there, ensuring no one saw. No cameras. No witnesses now. As the sun rose pale over the palace grounds, Edward stood outside the king's private study, his heart pounding inside. King Charles waited. Edward knocked twice. A voice called out, measured and calm. Enter. Edward stepped inside. The study was warm, lined with books and photographs. Charles sat behind a large desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up, and Edward saw the weight in his eyes. This was not a king preparing for ceremony. This was a man preparing for something far more difficult. Truth. Captain Harlow, Charles said, removing his glasses. I understand you've been instrumental in managing last night's single quotes S... situation.
Edward stood at attention.
Yes, Your Majesty. And you believe this meeting is necessary? It wasn't a question. But Edward answered anyway. I believe it's inevitable, sir. The question is whether it happens on your terms or someone else's. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Edward. You've been with us a long time, Captain. You've seen how things work, how they must work to preserve stability. I have, sir. And yet you're advocating for disruption. Edward chose his words carefully. I'm advocating for honesty, sir. I believe the public is ready for it. More than that, I believe they're hungry for it. Charles was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walking to the window. When I became king, he said quietly, I knew the scrutiny would be intense. Every decision questioned. Every action analyzed. But I thought I could control the narrative. Shape the story. He turned, his face lined with exhaustion. But you can't control people, Captain. You can only disappoint them or surprise them. Yes, sir. My wife tells me Thomas is angry, Charles continued. That he feels abandoned, erased. He does, sir. And you think meeting him will change that? Edward paused. I think it's a start, sir. Charles nodded slowly. Bring him in. Edward's heart raced. This was it. The moment that would define everything? He opened the door and gestured to Thomas, who'd been waiting in the hallway with Camilla. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, staring at the doorway as if it were a precipice. Camilla touched his arm gently. Go. Thomas took a breath and walked inside. Edward followed, then positioned himself by the door, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give them space. Charles and Thomas stood facing each other. Two men connected by marriage and secrets, but strangers in every way that mattered. Thomas, Charles said finally. His voice was even, but Edward heard the tension beneath it. Your Majesty, Thomas replied, stiff and formal. Please, sit. Thomas hesitated, then sat in the chair across from the desk. Charles remained standing as if uncertain how to proceed. I won't pretend to know what you've been through, Charles began, but I want you to know that I was aware of your existence. Camilla told me early in our relationship she never hid you from me. She just hid me from everyone else, Thomas said bluntly. Charles winced. It was complicated. It always is, isn't it? Thomas's voice was sharp. When the truth is inconvenient, it's complicated. Charles's jaw tightened. For a moment, Edward thought he might shut down, retreat behind royal protocol, but instead he sat down across from Thomas. You're right, Charles said, and I'm sorry. Thomas blinked, clearly not expecting that. I'm sorry that you were caught in the middle of choices that weren't yours to make, Charles continued. I'm sorry that protecting the institution meant hurting you. And I'm sorry that it took a crisis to bring us to this moment. Thomas's defenses wavered. Just slightly. So what now? You acknowledge me publicly and hope that fixes everything? No, Charles said. Nothing fixes everything. But acknowledgement is a start. Recognition is a start. And if you'll allow it, a relationship is a start. Thomas leaned back, arms crossed. And what does that look like? Do I get a title? A place at the table? Or do I get to be the footnote in your legacy? Charles didn't flinch. You get to decide. I'm not going to dictate your role, but I am offering you a choice. You can be part of this family with all the complications that entails. Or you can walk away, and I'll respect that too. And the press? Thomas asked. The statement. We'll release it today, Charles said. A joint statement. You, me, and Camilla. Acknowledging your relationship to us. Explaining the circumstances as truthfully as we can. And inviting the public to respect your privacy as you navigate this. Thomas stared at him. You'd really do that? I would, Charles said. Because you deserve to exist in the light, not in the shadows. For the first time, Edward saw Thomas's walls crack. His eyes glistened. His breath caught. I don't know if I can forgive her, Thomas said quietly. For giving me up. For the years lost? You don't have to, Charles replied. Forgiveness isn't required. But presence is? And if you're willing to be present, so am I. Thomas looked down, his hands trembling. I spent so long being angry. I don't know how to stop. And don't, Charles said. Be angry. Be hurt. Be whatever you need to be. But be here. With us. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel. Edward barely breathed, not wanting to disturb the fragile moment unfolding. Finally, Thomas looked up. Okay, I'll stay. For now, Charles nodded, relief washing over his face. That's all I ask. He stood and extended his hand. Thomas stared at it for a long moment, then took it. The handshake was brief, formal, but it was a beginning. As Thomas left the room, Edward saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Camilla was waiting outside. She looked at Thomas, her expression desperate, searching. He agreed, Thomas said simply. Camilla's face crumpled. She reached for him, but stopped herself, uncertain if she was allowed. Thomas paused. Then slowly he stepped forward and let her embrace him. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was contact. It was presence. And for now, that was enough. The statement was released at noon. Short, direct, honest. Today we acknowledge Thomas Bowles as a member of our family. His relationship to the Queen Consort has been private for many years, a decision made with the intention of protecting him from public scrutiny during his formative years. We recognize that this privacy came at a cost, and we deeply regret any pain caused. Moving forward, we welcome Thomas and ask that the public respect his privacy as he navigates his place within our family. The reaction was immediate. News outlets exploded. Social media erupted. Some praised the transparency. Others accused the family of damage control. Speculation ran wild, but the palace didn't respond to the noise. They let the statement stand. Edward watched from the sidelines as the media circus unfolded. He'd been summoned to a meeting with the king's private secretary, and he knew what was coming. Questions, scrutiny, perhaps consequences. But when he entered the office, he found King Charles waiting instead. Captain Harlow, Charles said. Sit. Edward sat, his spine straight, his mind prepared for reprimand. I've been informed that you played a significant role in last night's events, Charles continued. That you not only discovered the meeting but facilitated the conversation that followed. Yes, sir. You understand that your actions were, technically, a breach of protocol. I do. Sir Charles studied him for a long moment. Why did you do it? Edward considered lying, offering the safe answer. But after everything that had happened, the truth felt like the only option. Because I saw a family breaking, Edward said. And I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be put back together. Not perfectly, but honestly, Charles nodded slowly. You took a significant risk. Your career, your reputation, I know, sir, and yet you did it anyway. Yes, sir. Charles leaned back in his chair. I've spent my life balancing duty and desire, Captain. The crown and the heart. And I've made mistakes. Many of them. But last night you reminded me that sometimes the most dutiful thing we can do is the most human thing. Edward wasn't sure how to respond, so he stayed silent. I'm not going to reprimand you, Charles said. In fact, I'm promoting you. Head of Personal Security? You'll report directly to me. Edward's eyes widened. Sir? You showed judgment and compassion in a crisis, Charles interrupted. That's exactly what I need. Someone who sees people first and protocols second. Edward felt the weight of the promotion settle on his shoulders. It was an honor, but it was also a responsibility. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. Charles stood, signaling the end of the meeting. But as Edward reached the door, Charles spoke again. Captain? Edward turned. Thank you, Charles said, for reminding me what matters. Edward nodded and left the room, his mind spinning. Over the following weeks, the media storm slowly subsided. Thomas gave a single interview, carefully managed, where he spoke about his experience with measured honesty. He didn't attack Camilla. He didn't rage against the institution. He simply told his story, and people listened. Public opinion was mixed, as it always was. But there was a thread of respect woven through the criticism. Respect for the transparency. For the courage to admit imperfection, Thomas began attending private family dinners, slowly integrating into a world he'd only ever watched from afar. It wasn't easy. There were awkward moments, tense conversations, old wounds that didn't heal overnight. But he was there, present, seen. Camilla and Thomas began rebuilding their relationship, piece by painful piece. Some days were good, some days were hard, but they kept showing up. Edward watched it all unfold from his new post. He coordinated security with a different lens now. Not just protecting the family from external threats, creating space for them to be human. One evening, as Edward did his final rounds, he found Thomas standing alone in the East Wing corridor. The same hallway where Edward had first heard voices in the library weeks ago. "Can't sleep?" Edward asked. Thomas turned, a faint smile on his face. "Just thinking about—" Thomas gestured to the palace around them. "About how strange it is to be here, to belong even just a little." "It suits you," Edward said. Thomas laughed. "I don't know about that, but it's something more than I had before." Thomas nodded. "Thanks, by the way. For what you did, I know you risked a lot." Edward shrugged. "I did what felt right. Most people don't," Thomas said. "They do what's safe. What's expected." "Yeah, well," Edward said with a small smile. "Maybe I was tired of safe." "What?" They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two unlikely allies in a world built on tradition and secrecy. "Do you think it'll last?" Thomas asked. "This openness." Edward considered the question. "I think it'll last as long as people keep choosing honesty over comfort. That's the hard part. Not the first truth, but the 100th, the 1000th. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Then I guess we'll see." As Thomas walked away, Edward felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, but hope. The palace had always been a place of secrets, of locked doors and hushed conversations. But maybe, just maybe, it could also be a place where truth lived. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And for Edward Harlow, that was enough. He resumed his rounds, walking the marble corridors with a lighter step. The shadows were still there. The secrets still whispered in corners. But now there was also light. And light, Edward had learned, had a way of growing, one truth at a time, one choice at a time, one honest moment at a time. The palace would never be perfect. But tonight, as Edward locked the final door and headed home, he thought it might just be a little more human, and that was worth protecting.